Hi, this is Dr. Scott Young, and today is November 7th. You're probably going to see this on Monday, the 11th, but I don't have that exact answer here. But we're trying to get some information out, including Sheriff Mack is coming up here tomorrow, and I'll try to get him out maybe Monday. So that you might be seeing this Tuesday or Wednesday, but we're going to get you going here, and I want you to understand what's going on. So I'm going to give you, listen, this is part two of History of the Fed, okay? Do a 5 second version of the first part. I was told to like kind of break this up and make it a little more straightforward with that kind of stuff too. Okay, so you can go to drscottyoung.com to know who I am with that. I hate introductions. All right, so part one was talking really about the creation of the Fed, or the creation of the nation to 1907. And I always say this: truth will set you free, but first will make you miserable. Um, One of the points that we get into pretty heavily is the fourth section of the amendment, the 14th Amendment, that is really about finance and monies. This is how illegal they have been. Okay. Central bankers have been going on for 225 years, and we have to take them down. It starts with 1792 with the beginning of the Treasury with Alexander Hamilton and the central bank. Okay, it begins. It stirs up in what I call the bankruptcy phase, which is the War of 1812. We have 1836 that Andrew Jackson starts kicking out the central bankers, and we actually do pretty well up until the Civil War. And in the Civil War, we have another event that occurs, and we get the greenback dollar, where the Congress actually creates, through the president, with this legal means of having a real non-central bank money. Well, it pisses off all the central bankers, and it's going against the money lenders. That's the old term that they used at the time frame. And you have to understand why they killed Lincoln is because of all this. The 14th Amendment sets out the penalties against the money lenders in the future cabal. And 1871 has the ratification of the Corporation of the United States of America. It's instead of for America, it's of the United States, right? And then we end with the foundational bank run that I showed you. So if you want to know more about that, you can actually watch that on the first one. Okay. Hope that helps. Bank runs really are just circular events. They create fear, make you take your money out, and basically they control things. They're playing a long game when they do this, right? They're always looking. They're saying that this little tiny bank, it's never going to be the big banks. It's only going to be the small banks. That was the whole point. You take out the small banks, and then you've got it done, right? This is what they do to reduce this, and they mess with the people's confidence in banking. Now, I'm going to make a quick 5 second statement here. I hear this all the time. People say, well, let me pull this off screen because I want you to hear me for a second on this one. I hear people say, but shouldn't we take our money out of the banks? Or I go, okay, guys, think that one through for a hair. Okay, let's say I'm going to make up a number, and this is way, way high. Let's say 15% of Americans know anything about Nasara. Let's say 5% of Americans, so that means 330 million. That means basically, let's say 15 million Americans take their money out of the banks. Well, first off, it would mess the systems up a lot. That's not bad, okay. But what's really funny about this is they say you take your money out of the bank so that your money would be safe. Let's think that one through for a hair. Okay? If I take my money out of the bank, it's called a fiat currency. Let's say you are right. You take your money out of the bank and everything else crashes. So for the 95 percentile, make up any percentage you want to, but the massive majority, and I'm using 95%, would say, oh, we lost all of our money. And then that 5% walk in and go, I'm the bomb, baby. Walk back in with their cash and say, give me, the gold for it or whatever, the currency value. Well, first off, there's so many things wrong with that. A fiat currency only has value in the confidence of the systems. Like you could walk back into the bank or walk back into whomever you want to do as a possibility for purchasing capability, and the answer is you have nothing. I mean, because no one would have confidence in that system. Therefore, that paper is, you might as well staple it up against the wall, which is what the Bolivar has done for such a long time frame. Another conversation about Bolivar and how cool that currency is going to be down the road with that too. But you have to revalue those. Well, see, you're talking about a complete devaluation of the system. So anyone who tells you to take your money out of the banks is just stupid. Stupid. Stop doing that. Okay. Stop thinking that the silliness, because what would happen is absolute civil war, absolute utter chaos, worse than Obama's Civil War idiot movie, right? It's ridiculous. The system would not survive inside of itself, which is why we have Nasara that flips into a gold backed currency, and it flips it. The only people left with that fiat currency are the Jamie Raskins, the Joe, Bidens and the Obamas and everyone else. The people that tell you they're leaving America because Trump won, where do you think they're going? How about this place called Gitmo, baby? Okay. Off my rant, and we'll go into the next session. So I try to make it fast with that one so that you weren't, sitting there listening. But if you want to know more about it, go back and watch the first video. Okay. Let's do this next section, okay? And the creation of the Fed and then 1929 crash. So you got to see why it went that way. Okay. Now, one of my favorite stories to get into is the Titanic. Now, let's set the stage. 1907, bank runs have occurred. No one pays any attention to it. But one of the things that happens, and I'm going to pull this off the stage because I want you to listen to me for a sec, okay? Is that we have Senator Alderman who puts a bill around, I want to say 1910, 1911, and he puts in a bill about a central bank. And he tries to push it 2 or 3 different ways. And Alderman doesn't get any traction on this. This is the central bankers. They were testing the markets, most specifically Congress and Senate. And there was zero traction they could get with this thing called the central bank. They'd done all this work from 1871. I mean, killing Lincoln to 1871 to the bank runs that would actually go from the 1890s all the way to 1907. They'd done all their work to change the systems to have like physical control of a central bank in America so they can control the monetary situation. And Haldeman keeps pushing out this idea of a central bank. Well, he gets just roundly smacked, right? So they go, let's punt. So all the big boys decide that they want to have a Fed. Now, they call it the Federal Reserve, which is so funny because it has nothing to do with the Fed. I mean, a federal agency. And even economists are like blind to this point. And so some people go, well, what kind of economist are you, Scott? I mean, you don't know anything about this thing. I mean, you didn't grow up in being an economist, or you have a master's in economics. I'm like, those people are blind as a bat. Like, I mean, they're Clydesdales going down the way. They're so stupid because they think that the Fed is the only thing out there. And you don't understand the history of the Fed. If you understood the history of the Fed, you'd know why. So the 1912 presidential election is on the docket. So after being roundly defeated over and over again for the central bankers, Edward G. Gordon, who does a really interesting book, doesn't believe, by the way, I did talk to him one time. He doesn't believe in Nasara because he doesn't understand it. But he talks about The Creature from Jekyll Island. Really cool book, okay? About 20 years ago or more, 25 years ago, I read it for the first time. And what happens in there, and it's got background information. It's perfectly set up. What they did is the idiot cabal decided we're going to back both candidates. Doesn't that sound so familiar? Think Gore and Bush, both backed by both sides of this. Actually, it happens in 1992 when you have Poppy Bush, Clinton, and then Ross Perot that goes in and starts messing with the systems, right? Ross Perot got rewarded for this, right? And he got control of a lot of the prison systems on a private level, which is one of the reasons what happens. Okay, now we move forward, and they're backing both candidates. What's their goal? They don't care who gets in. No, who's the two candidates? It's Teddy Roosevelt, a big patriot, right? But he was going to put the Federal Reserve on the budget as a Republican, or excuse me, on the docket. And he was going to be required to do that. So this is how they do this. They back these candidates. Think AOC, think Joe Biden, think Kamala, think all these things. This is what they do. The money people put them forward, the George Soros, the other ones. This is how they accomplish the systems, right? And again, know your history. That's my background. I love history. I spend all kinds of time looking at history, and financial history will tell you what they do, right? They're just repeating the same playbook, over and over again. Okay, so we get Wilson, the Democratic candidate. It was one of my favorite presidents until I realized how many things he did. Ugh, right? But Wilson comes in, and then we'll get to what Wilson does here in a second. But Wilson gets in 1912. But in April of 1912, in the same basic time frame, we have a backdrop event. Okay, so the Titanic is being built by the White Star Line. There is a sister ship at the same time that was being built, and that sister ship, the real Titanic, actually gets damaged a couple times. It's got marks in it, so they don't want to put that out to sail, because if they put that out to sail and it goes down, which is what they were planning, they would only make $3 million in insurance claims. But if they put to sail a new ship out there, what would occur is that they would make $11 million. Huh. Wow, how sick is that system? But what's on the ship, and you can go through the history of it, is really interesting with this stuff too. Henry Morgan, or J.P. Morgan, is the owner of the White Star Line. He is the top of the Federal Reserve conversation. He is going to be on that ship. Doesn't dock in Ireland. He doesn't get on the ship, but he allows three of his rivals, Guggenheim, Strauss, and Astor. Levi Strauss, okay? These are power brokers, and they're completely opposed to the concept of the Federal Reserve. Now remember, this is in April of 1912. You see how they're thinking a little bit ahead. So the ship goes down with nefarious points. I mean, it doesn't, if you look at the historical point behind this, it is so crazy. Why was there not reporting of icebergs at this time frame? Why did they go on a northern route? Why did they steam the boilers up a lot higher? Why did you have it hitting along so many edges of that ship? Why did they create the ship in a way that if several of the underdecks, the water filtration systems, if they were flooded, well then after a few of them, then the ship was going to go down? Why didn't they put enough lifeboats on? Why were the lifeboats that might have saved, there's 2,200 people on the ship, and why is it that only 500-600 get off of that ship when It was full on empty. Why is it that first class passengers who would have been kicking everyone out of line, Strauss, Astor, and Guggenheim, why don't they get off the ship? See, there's so many questions that don't get answered in this. And yet, when you understand the monetary system, this is why they did it. It's to create the Fed. And once you see the level of the silliness in this way, they are mass murders. This is what I call, at least in this more of a modern terminology, this is the first false flag. False flags always kill people. False flags are about, look over here, don't worry about what I'm talking about. Look over here, I'm doing something over here. But what was the creation of the situation of the Titanic? You're focused on the event, the horrible event of the Titanic, and yet you didn't know they were killing off everything. Those, in essence, those millionaires would have been billionaires in today's time frame. Billionaires don't just die in this way. It was a planned destruction of 3 men, so they took out 1,700 people. Pretty sick. Okay. Now, Wilson had a campaign of reforms. He had a Clayton Act, which was a strong anti-monopoly law. Now, part of that law and part of the move forward of that law was against some of the big ones like J.P. Morgan or Rockefeller or these big boys who had been collapsing America through the late 1800s, right? And yet, what it did, the Standard Oil separation actually messed with America worse by breaking them up. It actually made him spiderweb into all the areas, the Rockefeller, and so he made way more money by the breakups than anything else did, right? This is what they did, and yet he was doing this, and this is a horrible idea. He took away tariffs, lowered it on imports. What that does is it said American manufacturing is going to be lessened by that. And then he wanted to bring them upon the Federal Reserve. Oh, it's called the progressive spirit. By the way, there are so many things going on in the background of the late 1800s. we have the theory of evolution. We have the Romantic era that is dying at the time. The age of reason that's coming on. The deletion of of educational situations that talk about biblical principles. We have the Bible being destroyed every time you turn around. Look at D.H. Lawrence, the man who died. There's so many things happening right at the same time frame. D.H. Lawrence wrote The Man Who Died in 1910, the same basic time frame we're talking about here, right? This is how they move forward. And then they were moving forward, Rockefeller, all these other idiots were moving forward into places like Vanderbilt. They created these different universities. And they created the universities to deal with the medical issues. You're going to see it as you go along. The financial events of 1913. So December 23rd, 1913, they shoved through Congress and Senate, which were already out on their Christmas break. They shoved through the Federal Reserve, and the president signs it. And the same year in 1913, we have the 16th Amendment under the IRS. Do you understand the IRS is the vehicle of the Fed? And then we have World War I, which we'll talk about in a bit. But let me show you some of the just background information with this too. From 1913 to 1929, the largest increase we have a huge amount of decrease. Then there's some increases here. So let me explain what happens here. There's an increase of major components, like food goes up in price. And so we have a an increase of production, but we have a decrease or increase in pricing. So we got some mess with pricing. They're screwing around with the systems a little bit. And this is just, it was very, very subtle at the moment. But what they were doing is touching in on agriculture and land and food production. And we have just so many different areas that they were touching onto. So they were messing around with the systems as they went. So we have a creation of a debt system because the Fed is really a debt system. And so one of the fakest wars in the history of the world is World War I. Prince Ferdinand and his wife are killed in Sarajevo in 1914. And you go, how does that tiny event in Yugoslavia of the time frame with that too? We call it Czech Republic and expands from there. And Croatia, blah, blah, blah. But why does that tiny event lead into a world war? You see, we call it World War I. At the time frame, they were calling it the Great War or the war to end all wars. Do you know that some of the eschatology theory points and timelines that you see, and I have a timeline on drscottyoung.com, you can go over here and see some of that stuff. But some of the basic timelines come from the same time frame because they thought that we were coming to the 7-year tribulation. In this time frame, America doesn't even get involved until 1917, and it doesn't end until 1918. We have a lot of people dying in it, but we waited until France and England just wiped themselves out. In the middle of that war, we have Germany, who has their Wehrmacht system. They have no money. They're fighting on two fronts. Now, people say, well, yeah, they're fighting the Russians, and they got the Russians out. They sent 25 million along with Lenin in a train to Moscow to start the Bolshevik revolution. I mean, there's like, wait a second, what's going on? How do they spend 25 million to get them out? Well, it was, you might call it a brilliant scheme. It was how the globalists were thinking about this. They needed to take out Russia, and they created the seeds of the communist socialist environment. This is what they were doing. It's part of what they were doing out there. They were also mass murdering people, up to as many as, some people say 10 million. No, 30 million people die in that thing. At the same time frame, again, same basic time frame, 1913, we have the fraudulent IRS starting up. It was supposed to be only 1% of the top, 1% earners would only spend 1% of their earnings from 1913 to 1933. Oh, that didn't go very well. They created an inflated levels of pricing, which is some of the stuff we're talking about here. But the wages weren't going up with that too. So when you don't have wages going up, earners were losing money through this. And they were ignoring the original Constitution that says only Congress is allowed to make the money. This is in the first article under the 8th and 10th section. You got crazy things occurring here. In the 10th section, no state shall enter into a treaty, alliance, confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, or emit bills of credit. See, I've heard professors say, well, the 10th Amendment doesn't talk about it because it says, coins of money. Well, come on, idiot. It said bills of credit, which what do you think what do you think a fiat is? That is a bill of credit. Make anything but gold or silver coin a tender in payments or debts. Pass any bill, attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts, and grant any title or nobility. Oh my gosh, they put themselves upon the pedestals, which is the Fed chairman, and this is all against the Fed. And yet the framers of the Constitution knew this could happen because central banks were around for a long time. This is opposite of what happens. The Fed is an illegal organization. It starts as an illegal organization, and the IRS is an illegal organization to support pulling money from the people to the Fed. And then we have 1929. So I'm gonna back off from this for half a second. I want you to hear me because I'm trying to make this brief, but let me give you a background. The 1920s have a very weird thing. So we have a massive growth because we made a ton of money. The Americans were made a ton of money through World War I. So we became the debt collector of all these nations, including Germany, who in the Treaty of Versailles was just wiped out. And they were watching this and were just loving the wipeout. This is how sick they are. And America is going through a boom. Okay, the roaring 20s with this too. Now, the men that came back from service were the first time in their life they thought about having sexual relations with women on a more grander scale. Now, it doesn't mean it didn't happen before that time frame, but it was happening more systemically. Women were thinking about, expanding their role into, sexual kind of responses. The flappers, you get some of this stuff. The 20s messed with people in a lot of ways. And then we have an expansion of capital. So what they did is they said, Scott, you can buy a stock and you have to put 10% of the money down. Well, when do you get to keep a stock and you hold it on reserve? And if you sell it, you have to, pay the rest of the 90%, right? So what would happen, and I'm just making up numbers here, but just think about this with me, right? I have a stock X, or excuse me, stock Y, because I don't want to have Twitter there, but stock Y. And I buy 1,000 shares at $10. So it's $10,000, right? So I put $1,000 down, a lot of money for that time frame, right? So you have to have people that have some wealth, a little. And so I've got a $10,000 share. I've got $1,000 into it. I only have to pay for it if I get out of this. So and I get this in 1921, through 1921, and then up through 29, at the end of this time frame, the stock, let's say, has gone to $30. I got $30,000. Even if I have to put $9,000 down toward it, and I want to retire today, I would have $21,000, right? And you go, this doesn't sound like a lot of money. $10,000 was a very, very rich man. You're talking about someone who would have had in levels, when you talk about the terminology of a time frame or the value of a currency. This is before the gold-backed currency gets messed with. They're still on a gold-backed standard of $20.60. So what happens is that I would have $21,000, like many hundreds of thousands of dollars, easily enough to retire upon. And then this occurs, right? So let's talk a little bit about what happens. Bloody Valentine, 1929, is one of the weirder events that you come up with. Now, there were gang violence going through Chicago and other areas, right? This is Bonnie and Clyde kind of ideas. Okay. You have these really amazing pictures. They never took the pictures the same way as they did from this time frame. I mean, if you look at pictures from the Civil War, they're bloody corpses, and you just go, my gosh, we don't want to see all that gross stuff. This picture doesn't give you the full thing, but this shocked people. Bloody Valentine happens, and Chicago police call for the killers of gangmen. And so this happens in Valentine's Day, 1929. It hits all the papers. I mean, Bugs Moran shoots up a whole bunch of people, the police catch them, they go on this kind of thing. And you go, so it was capturing the nation because they were very, very, everyone was very sick and tired of all the killing that happens. So we have Bloody Valentine shooting. Again, focus on the shooting. All we're doing is focusing on the shooting. But you know what happens on the same exact day in Valentine's Day? The Fed met. And they decided, oh, wait, we're going to shut down the markets. We're going to mess with the systems. And we're going to do a stock market crash in 1929. So Wall Street crashes in October of 29, planned in Valentine's Day. Who did it? The Fed. So Scott, who thinks that my stock is $30,000, right? The markets are crashing around me. I'm desperately trying to sell my stock as it goes down and down and down. And it goes below 10 bucks. Then it goes into what we call this term only happened in this time frame. The phraseology, is so fascinating. It's called penny stock. Scott sells it for 5 cents a share. I lose the $1,000 that I put in it. So I can't even cover the 90%, right? But at least, can kind of get something out of it. I get 5 cents a share off those 1,000 shares. Who buys it? See, you don't, if I'm trying to sell something, like I'm trying to sell this USB drive, right? And I can buy, I bought a whole bunch of them at Micro Center down in Dallas, right? And let's say I buy 10 of them, and let's say I bought it for $50. I don't remember the number, let's say. And so the question is even if you have a product and you're going to sell, so you have to have buyers. But in this time frame, what they did is no one was there to buy anything. Watch the movie with Dan Aykroyd and Eddie Murphy called Trading Places. Trading Places, Dan Aykroyd, Eddie Murphy. It is literally the stock market crash explained in modern terminology. This is a cabal movie. This is what they're telling you. By the way, it was in the 80s. It's an interesting movie, right? And it's how they flipped the script on this. This is what goes on in the background. And so people were selling this car, $100, buy the car, must have cash, lost all in the stock market. He is desperate. This is the Scott character here, right? He's trying to sell off anything he can. And he can't come up with the money. Do you see the background of what happens? And that is the basis of what starts in the Fed. Now, we're going to get into the gold standard and all the way through 9/11, a long ways there, but we'll explain that one in the next phase. So guys, if you like this, I appreciate it. Just like and subscribe, but also share it with your friends, because I guarantee you're going to learn a lot about what happens. You have to know your past so you don't repeat it in the future. Thanks so much.